I'm queer. I've never been in the traditional, so I'm used to breaking the mold a little bit, and if that means being like a trailblazer and trying something new and maybe failing, but learning something, I'll do that.
What's your name and where are you from?
My name is Micah Lewis Van Sweezy. I'm from Kalamazoo, Michigan. Lived in Richland, Michigan for a lot of my life. But as well, I've lived in a lot of other places. I've lived in Vietnam, in Thailand, in Chicago, where I studied. And now I find myself back here in Kalamazoo. But I guess at the start of things, a lot of my early childhood was in Vietnam. After I was born, my parents took my siblings and I to Hanoi, and that's where I lived for about 5 years while I was growing up there. My parents were really involved in the church, stemming from Presbyterianism, but later moving on to more non-denominational. But originally, they were really strongly rooted in Presbyterianism and our local church, and they did a lot of missionary work abroad. And so before I was born, they were doing missionary work. In fact, that's where my parents really bonded and had an early relationship. They went to like Sweden to do a missionary trip mutually. I digress, but the reason why my parents took my siblings and I to Vietnam was to do missionary work while still supporting and raising a family. And partly as well, my mother, who is Vietnamese, wanted my siblings and I to have a relationship to the country, to the land, the culture, the people, while still developing, so it wasn't so estranged.
I feel like that's an important thing to do. I feel like a lot of Americans kind of lose touch with their ancestral
Sure.
home countries.
Yeah,
so it's pretty cool.
Yeah, I'm very grateful for that. I was the youngest of 4 siblings. Some of my older siblings, they had some Vietnamese skills, but I was pretty much plopped there right after I was born. So my auditory, like listening and processing skills were like really strong, but my true language, like an articulation, speech skills were really weak. But I apparently could listen to full languages and full discussions and conversations in Vietnamese, but just respond back in English kind of lazily. We'd mostly use English in the household. Since then, though, a lot of my language skills have faded from me, which is a bit saddening. So that's something I'm trying to work on for myself. But yeah.
Are your parents still quite involved in the church?
No, not really anymore. My dad has his own practice, his own faith that he does at home. And in fact, I would consider him like a creative too. He tries to imbue a lot of his creative output with his faith. Conversely, as like I feel like, I don't know, creatives who are not tied to a religion feel like that it's their faith too, and they have a strong desire and motivation to put that expression out. So I can definitely empathize with him and how he approaches his work. But yeah, they moved away from the church a bit, one, because my mom has just been working a lot, and two, my father with like the local church, his relation with them was a little bit, there's like a schism, I guess, around like initial COVID quarantine lockdown, because in Michigan here, right, there was some, I don't know if it was federal or the state here, but it was like, places of worship for the most part never closed at all during like hard quarantine, right? Because it was like a necessity under some people's decision. And, there were some churches that like took independent steps and decisions to be like, even though we know we can stay open, we'll close, or like we're going to do remote services, things like that. But the church we really were tied to, and the church my parents were tied to, and which supported their missionary work, also having me abroad too, they didn't have any sort of like progressive decline to like stay open for like the safety of others for COVID. And I think that resonated with my dad, because he also negatively resonated with him. Like, right, it changed his position on things. He has a disability. He's immune compromised, so he's very aware about like public space and you know, how considerate others are going to be to preserving space for those who are disabled, right, or who don't have the means to always be present there. So, but anyway, so that's kind of where my parents are. Me personally, maybe we'll get into this later, but I don't really consider myself affiliated with any church or religion, but it definitely did do a lot of shaping of who I am today. Back to the missionary work, I guess, it was like, you know, some of my fondest memories, I guess, were in the atmosphere of like creative expression. My dad was the large project he was executing. He was making a film with some of his colleagues, but he had a friend like direct it. He was doing a lot of the producing, but their goal was to make like the first like Christian film in Vietnamese, which they did.
Very cool.
Yeah, it's called The Bridge. You know, it's the plot is like, let's see if I can remember this, but it was just like there's this girl, she's beautiful, and then she's about to be married, I think, or she's in a relationship, but then she gets blinded in a freak accident by like a street vendor's like hot oil, and it's a little graphic, but you know, she goes through life-changing disability, and then she finds God and, you know, someone else who loves her for who she is and accepts her for who she is, and you know, she finds light amidst the dark. I don't know. It was my dad's work.
I see the vision.
Yeah, I mean, my role in all that, I guess, I spent a lot of hours behind like a disc burner stack, because my siblings and I, we would all help my parents like make these movies. You know, granted, they also had like a small cohort of other missionaries who would come in and out seasonally or come for a series of months to help with the production. But when it came time to the distribution, you know, I was about maybe like 4 or 5 or so. So we would just be like burning CDs and then like putting in the DVD cases and stuff. It was kind of fun. Yeah, maybe
sounds fun.
Maybe pushing the edges of like how much a child should be working, but it was fun. It was easy. It wasn't too bad. Yeah, with all those discs and the movies that they produced, at the time it was still like very shunned. And I think in the early 2000s there was like legislature against like Christianity. Vietnam is like, you know, burned by Catholicism within like South Vietnam, and any sort of empirically tied spread of religion obviously raises some concern for that state. But more so the danger was for my mother, because she was still, I think she's still recognized as like a Vietnamese citizen, even though she has her American citizenship. You know, if she was caught with these like sort of Christian materials, they could have imprisoned her for indefinite periods or trialed her. So there was some threat there, you know, threat of just being deported, exiled for me, my father and the other missionaries. But yeah, they would just like secretly like pass them out to like underground churches, like give them a whole stack or like boxes, or we would like, there's like a whole street of like bootleg DVDs and media and stuff, and then we would just like slip them in the stacks, so someone would just have
guerrilla marketing.
Yeah, no, literally guerrilla marketing. It was kind of funny. You know, I definitely admire my dad for the commitment he shows in his work and his craft and like producing a project and like seeing it through. And I was so young, and I guess I didn't, even now, like saying it, I'm like, wow, I never realized like how large scale of a production that really was. Considering it was also like his first time really doing anything like that.
It's impressive.
Yeah. Obviously I have my personal opinions and differences towards like the intent and the content of it, but the act of just doing that, though, I think, standing by something that you love or want to express and doing it, I think is still admirable.
Definitely.
Yeah, I feel like I've talked about growing up in Vietnam, but obviously, like, it's on my face. And I talk about my mother being Vietnamese, but if it's not self-evident enough, my mother was a Vietnamese refugee immigrant from the war, as I feel like most diasporic Vietnamese people are in America, right? It's like, the first gen, they're about 60 years old now, and they all came in one big wave around 1975 at the fall of the Second War, the fall of Saigon. My mother was unfortunately one of those people, right? It's unfortunate that it's such a common story too.
Yeah.
But I guess it's also, thinking about it dually, I'm thankful that America offered refuge to Vietnam and Vietnamese people like that in some capacity. These things are complicated, right? And it's muddied, it's intertwined. It's hard to pull out snippets and apply morals and ethics to it.
Yeah.
But it happens still, right? So, my mother came over here. She was around 9 years old. She's one of 9 kids. So she came with my grandfather and grandmother, making her and my grandparents first generation. And then, so I'm second generation here since I was born here. But yeah, most of them still live out, my grandparents and aunts and uncles, most of them still live out their lives here in like the Midwest, in Michigan or in Indiana, Chicago. I have a couple uncles who live out in California. There's like a large Vietnamese-American population in Southern California or in like Texas. Those are like the 2 biggest population blooms there. But I don't know, it's a little interesting that they decided to land here in Michigan, but yeah.
Yeah, because that's 2 very different atmospheres or environments, going from South Vietnam to Michigan.
Cold Michigan weather.
Change. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm sure they experienced a culture shock coming over and, meeting their neighbors.
For sure. They were sponsored through a local church, like my family specifically, my parents' family, mother's family specifically. I forget what the church was, but yeah, my grandfather actually passed away last year.
I'm sorry.
It's okay. It's been like actually just last week was like the anniversary of like his 1-year death. But I feel like when I went to the funeral and was reading what is that called?
Obituary?
Yeah, like kind of just like, in memorial,
eulogy.
Like eulogy. Yeah, thank you. Like, reading all this material, looking at all these old photographs. I'm like, oh my gosh, this was just like a secret container of like all these things I didn't even know of about like my grandfather, like a time capsule of just like familial history that I didn't know. Like there was like a news clipping of talking about my Vietnamese family, the To family, being like the first Vietnamese family to like emigrate to Kalamazoo.
Oh, cool.
Isn't that, it's like so weird. Like, I don't know, just in terms of like the scope of things, but, I didn't realize we were the first. That feels kind of cool. Because I know there's other Vietnamese families here, but, still, I don't think the Vietnamese population in Kalamazoo is like the biggest. But I don't know, I felt like I learned a lot of new things about my family there. Seemed a bit unfortunate though that it was like at like the end of someone's life, right? Yeah. That information was coming out. Perhaps it's like a general thing or a cultural thing, but I know definitely for my maternal family, it's like a traumatic, like cultural thing to like not want to talk about things that happened in the past. So like understanding like my mom's perception around, America's involvement in the war and her travel to get here at the fall of the war and everything, like it's all under lock and key, and she doesn't even want to open it. So it's like, I don't even want to, poke the dog.
Trauma she doesn't want to relive kind of thing.
Yeah, and I don't want to make her go through that.
For sure. There could be a day that, she gets to a point where she wants to talk about it, or maybe not.
I hope so. There was some moments that, like, I had a high school project or something for like AP US history, and I interviewed my grandparents and my grandfather similarly to this, and I was thankful for that, where I got some good questions in with him and was able to record it. But even then, it's like, I didn't realize how much I was missing, or what parts I was missing, and what parts I'm still missing. I can't focus on that too much, though. Obviously I'm grateful for everything I know and everything that's brought me to be where I am today, including my mother, my parents, their willingness and support of my practice, of who I am. Took a little bit of struggle to get there, but I'm here now.
Good.
Yeah.
Awesome. So you lived in Vietnam for some time.
Yeah.
When did you come back to America?
So my parents want about all of my siblings to have pretty full-fledged, like, American K-12 education.
Sure.
Even though I said I was the youngest, my older siblings did like some homeschooling, right? Or they were at like an international school. I think my sister went to an international school for a bit in Vietnam. But by the time we all came back together as a unit, it was around like 2005, 2006. I was like going into kindergarten, 2005. Yeah. We definitely just thinking about it now, it's all coming back, but we would make trips to and from. Like we made a trip back in like first grade, went for some time, while my parents finished up some work. But then as I got older, there's more space in between the trips and how many we took.
It's an expensive plane ticket for 7 kids, or for 8 people.
Right, six of us total. Yeah,
6 of us. Okay. That's a lot. It
is. It is, and airfare has only gone up and up and up. So, yeah. But I did all of like K-12 education here. I don't know, second grade. I think my parents just like wanted to go somewhere warmer. We went to Florida for like a year. I don't know. It was really weird.
You got tired of the snow.
I think so. And then like my parents just like signed a condo for a year or something, or maybe they were part of some like, they got schemed in or something. I don't know. I digress. Like those condominiums. Timeshare schemes. I don't know what happened. But I went to school here in Richland, Michigan. There's only one school there, but I won't name drop it. But I don't know. I really didn't like school. Like I did and I didn't. I enjoyed like the friends I had. I don't know. There's a lot of tough parts to school.
Yeah.
I knew I excelled in a lot of ways. Whether that was like creative expression or reading, writing. I was such an ELA kid. I loved English class. Hated math.
Yeah.
Terrible at math still today. But yeah, I don't know. And then I also had like a speech impediment growing up.
Oh.
Yeah. And it comes back to now, either when I'm like slightly tipsy or I don't know, really anxious or something, but I had a really strong lisp. That, and maybe I was like a little too like loud and I don't know, ADHD for the class, because I would get pulled away, taken out of class. That's never a good sign, but either to do like speech training, or they would be like, oh, this is like a special class for you guys. Like, we're just going to give you some extra focus here. And I thought it was like special treatment, but in hindsight, they were definitely helping me with some other things, but that doesn't mean I don't think I was still excelling in a lot of ways throughout school.
Very cool. So we were talking about early life and you getting into elementary school here in Michigan, in Richland.
Yeah, so Richland, Michigan, it's an interesting mix. It's predominantly white, as of much of Michigan is, and, a large part of America. But as well in Richland, there's this like clash of, I don't know, really like country folk perhaps, and less privileged kids. And then you have like people who live on Gull Lake and are really affluent and have a private boat or something. So either way, I was like displaced. But I found community amongst like the other weirdos, as other queer kids do. Like I did band. I was really good in band. I'm not gonna lie. It was I did alto saxophone in like concert band, but I also did like a lot of other musical instruments. My parents really wanted to support me and my other siblings into like some sort of like musical instrument. So I was doing like piano lessons from like second grade, violin lessons from around the same time. And then in like middle school, that's when I did band. I didn't start taking the middle school band seriously though until like the last year. But I if anything, I really had a fondness for piano. That's what I would study the most, or like have an appreciation for. My dad thinks it's like genetic and it's like skipped a generation because his, I don't know, great aunt also was like a pianist or something and had like a really musical ear. Like that was my approach, where I could like listen to something and then kind of imitate it pretty closely. Anyways,
it's a very handy skill for learning an instrument.
Yeah. Makes music reading a little more harder, I will say. I was taught through the Suzuki method, which only like enforced that. Suzuki was like a classical Japanese violinist, and his way of approach to like teaching younger generations would be to like have them embrace their listening skills, right? But it can also weaken reading and like skills and those sorts of things. Anyways, but I admit and I recognize that like being able to have parents to, one, buy me the lesson time and like buy me those instruments even when I wasn't fully invested, like that's a privilege to have. And I'm grateful that my parents wanted to either pursue or even like entertain the idea even if like I wasn't fully committed. It's a terrible stereotype, but of course, like there's the joke of like Asian parents or Asian mom like forcing their kid into like piano or violin, and I don't think I was immune to that. But I do think I still resonated though with piano. I really love piano to this day, even though I'm not like currently trained, but I still play it for myself here and there. Yeah. That being said, it was like every summer I would do these like intensive summer camps here in Michigan. So there's like Blue Lake Fine Arts Camp, and then like Interlochen. And Interlochen, it can be like a whole boarding school. I never did that, but my parents, funded and sent me off to these like sort of camps to hone me into like my piano skill, because I was like, even from a young age, I was like, oh, I'm going to do piano and I want to be a star or something. I don't even know what I would say to my mom, but
just a starry-eyed kid.
Yeah, no. And I still grasp onto some of that for sure, but perhaps my motivations have changed a bit. But my parents were very supportive and let me go to these camps, or funded me to these camps. And the first time I went, it was like the summer between 7th and 8th. My mom was like, oh, you also get like a minor. You can pick like another art study field that's like not piano if you want to do it. And I was like, I want to do clay. I want to do ceramics. That feels so cool. I was like, I've never really done that. I've maybe made like a pinch pot owl in like school or something, but like I want to make a clay sculpture. I was like, it sounds so cool to like turn mud into like something like permanent, like a rock. And I was like, yeah, it just like was so dazzling to me even then and still now. But since that summer, like every summer I'd go and do one of these camps, it felt like a little summer fling. I would always choose to do ceramics as my like secondary medium. And so just like reoccurring time and practice and support from like arts field and people and creatives like really nourished me to be pretty well skilled in ceramics like by the time I was in high school. More so than the average like high schooler, I guess. And like I was in like one of my last year, it was like between junior senior year or something, at like Interlochen, and I was just only in the ceramic studio. I was not in the practice rooms. I was resenting piano. I had this realization too. I was like, gosh, I can't even get myself to sit in the practice room to play piano, but like all my peers can, and like this is my competition. Like when we all go to college, like this is who I'm going to be juried against for programs. This is who are people going to be competing for like similar positions, whether in an orchestra or performance catalog, right? Like if I can't like even get myself to practice and like execute at a similar bar to them, like maybe I should give up. Maybe that's a little too like pessimistic, but it was just a realization. I realized how much I was willing to put in. And at the same time, I was just like so enamored with clay, and I was just like split, and I was just only sticking in the studio. And my clay teacher was like, "You're in here like too much. Like you need to like maybe check in with your piano teacher and make sure you're doing the right thing." Or she was like, "Maybe you could just switch." I was like, "That's a thing? I didn't realize it was a thing." She was like, "Yeah, switch." I mean, this is just a summer camp. It doesn't really matter anyways. But I ended up switching to be full-time visual art major. And that was probably like the first time that I felt really supported to do so. One, I guess even at an early age, I recognized that pursuing music and art was not going to be easy. But then pursuing specifically like visual art would be even harder. At least I found that to be like the common consensus, or like what people would talk about.
The starving artist.
Right. Yeah. We hear that trope so much, the starving artist, and it's unfortunate. But it was like, I felt so passionate about ceramics. I was like, I don't care. It's like, I know that I can make something cool and great and excellent out of this medium. And I feel like I have something worth sharing, and I'm going to enjoy it every bit of the way. Even if it's hard, even if it doesn't make me money, I'm going to enjoy it still. Right. Instead of, I naively compared myself to like people in, a 9-to-5 who don't enjoy it, right? And then even though they are making money, it's like, where are you being fulfilled? For me, it was important to be fulfilled, like in my heart, and like, with my hands. I like working with my hands. So that kind of reshifted my whole approach. That teacher was like, maybe you should really consider doing this for college. And I was like, you really think so? And she was like, yeah, I do. And within like a year and a half, like of me graduating high school, I like whipped together a portfolio and started applying to like all the art schools I could think of. I really aspired for SAIC because it was like local, and they had a much like, I don't know, it seemed like a fresher contemporary approach, not so formalistically and institutionally like heavy, but I don't know. It seemed nice to me, and I also knew that I wanted to leave Michigan. I wanted to get out of my parents' home, and I wanted to get out of just like Southwest Michigan. I needed some more diversity. I needed more gay people around me. I didn't talk about it too much, but it's just like it was hard, and I feel like there wasn't really anything redeeming about it being hard, but it was just hard and annoying being like one of the only, even though I'm half, like one of the few kids of color, and then on top of it, like queer kids at my school. It was just not ideal, It led to a lot of bullying, whatnot. Like I said, I felt like I was the star of like the weirdos or something. I would do like theater and band and whatnot, and everyone, we got along there, and I felt like I made a good connection there. Anyways, I digress. But so I ended up really aspiring for SAIC, the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. I did like one portfolio day while I was still in high school, and they said, no, we wouldn't accept this portfolio, but then, really tightened it up. And then the next year when I actually did apply, I got in, which felt really great. That was,
That's awesome.
Yeah, it was, I knew it was going to be expensive, and it was expensive. I wouldn't have gone if I wouldn't have had either some merit scholarship, which I did, and then also some like federal funding, which I did. But even then, I'm like, oh my God, I mean, the federal funding is just loans, and then now I have all these loans that are just like looming and scratching at me, right? So that's fun, but all that aside, I really enjoyed my time in college at art school. SAIC specifically, and I think a lot of art schools have like a duality to them, like a double-edged blade, where it's like some people find it really valuable and some people really discredit it. And I think it's a matter of like what it is in art school, right? You're approaching. I don't think it's for everyone. I wouldn't recommend it for everyone. Again, like I'm grateful that I had parents who supported me in some way through that, who fronted a lot of that financial cost and burden for me. But as well, it's like I am grateful for the school's programming because it led me to think more conceptually and critically for my work. And then after my education there, I feel like then that's when I was able to garner more technical skills. I think often critique of like art school is, right, you see like people throwing together projects or claiming concept over execution, and it's like, oh, we're left with maybe like a sloppy piece of work when we're talking about something that's like a lot higher brow, but is it actually happening? I digress. But I feel like that could be an easy and accurate generalization to make. That being said, though, I think the connections I did make, though, in art school and the ways it did allow me to structure my thought around art were invaluable. And I don't think I could have gotten that elsewhere. And it also led me to just like putting a lot of good roots down in Chicago, which I feel like I don't call myself a Chicago-based artist, but like Chicago orbit. I come back here and there for some exhibitions or opportunities. And it's nice to have that.
It's a drivable distance.
Yeah. And it's like, oh my gosh, I would love to not have to live there and still like be able to show work there, because it's only 2.5 hours. I mean, I have so many friends in Chicago who are like, you should live here, come live with us, or come be back here and, be at our studio. And as much as I'd love that, it's just like, for me in my position right now as like an artist, as an employee, it's not feasible. Chicago's expensive.
It's busy and fast. And loud.
Yeah. I have like 2.5 jobs. I don't know. 3 jobs. I don't know. 2 jobs outside of my artistic practice right now, just so I can sustain myself and my practice, right? And I feel like me being transplanted to Chicago would only make that more difficult. So
I've heard it said that capitalism is the death of art. So the more you have to work, the less you can create.
Yeah, and that's definitely accurate. And that I think that's the struggle for a lot of creatives and artists, right? It's like, how do we, when our art and creativity isn't fueling itself, right? How do we operate within capitalism or as an employee somewhere without exhausting ourselves to still create, right? I don't have the answers for that. I don't know who does, right? It's the constant question. But yeah, I'm currently trying to figure that out. So now I graduated in the spring of 2022 from SAIC with my undergraduate. So there's no focus primarily. It's like interdisciplinary, so it's just a general BFA, but during my time there, I was focused specifically in sculpture and ceramics. And yeah, once again, it's like I've just constantly been enamored by ceramics. It's just been here. I've grown with it. I'm still learning from it. It's nothing that I feel like I've mastered. But I'm now at like an emerging artist state, I guess. I don't know. It feels weird to say. That wasn't appointed by me. Other people have said that for me, which I guess I'll share. I just got back from the Salt Lake City convention for the National Council for Education in Ceramic Arts. And this year I was awarded as one of the 6 emerging artists. So it was pretty big. It still
Congratulations.
Thank you.
It's awesome.
It still feels a little crazy because I'm in the wake of like processing all that still. But yeah, I don't know. I graduated with my undergraduate like 3 years ago. And even then, like, I look at this cohort of other emerging artists and they all like have their like master's degrees of like over 2 years or so for the most part. And I don't know, the imposter syndrome is always real, right? That doesn't go away. Like, I know I can be doing good things and I see other people be doing good things and I know it's there for everyone. And then it's like, it's always a battle. But yeah, I don't know. So since graduating school, I've just been trying to promote myself, sustain myself independently as an artist. I'm aspiring to hopefully break through to a certain point where financially, I don't have to work those 2 other jobs to maintain the studio practice. Yeah, that can be executed in a lot of ways, but yeah, I don't know. It's tough. Sorry, how much more time do we have here? I feel like I was...
we got a few more minutes.
Oh, okay. Do we? Oh, okay.
You did some further education back in Vietnam as well, right?
Yeah, it was all like self-conducted. So that occurred between 2023, 2024. I was in like Hanoi for a series of like 6 months. And so that was after I graduated with my undergrad. I received a grant from NCCA, the National Council for Education in Ceramic Arts. It was a grant to help fund undergraduate like studies and research, or like recent undergraduate studies. So with that, my proposal was to go to Vietnam and research traditional and contemporary forms or industrial forms of ceramic production. There's a village right outside of Hanoi on the river. It's called Ba Chang, and they've been producing ceramics for over like a millennium. Wow. So they've been there for a long time. They're not the only one that's been around that long. They just have more successful marketing, and that's why more people know about them. But that being said, though, it's like I went there kind of blind. I had professors and family who I could like confer with and be like, okay, well, what are your connections in like Hanoi or like in the art world or in like specifically the village of Ba Chang and like the ceramic workers there. And, not many connections were strong. And most of the people I met with were just like, you may just have to go there and feel it out, which is what I did. And it was scary and it worked out. But once again, I'll have to appreciate my parents and recognize their efforts in this as well too. Like, I don't speak Vietnamese, fluently. I speak like a child. I'm like a baby. I'm not very strong in Vietnamese now. So my mother and my father both came for about 3 weeks to help just travel with me around Vietnam, and we saw some other family friends and whatnot, but really get me on my feet and help me set up, get me with an apartment. So I wouldn't have been able to do that if my mother wasn't able to like take off work and afford to do that and to come support me. So I'm appreciative for her and my father to do that.
Shout out mom and dad.
Yeah.
So we left off with you and your experience in the ceramic portion of the Vietnam. Ba Chang? Is that the name of the city?
Ba Chang, yeah.
Okay.
So B accented A, T, TR accented A, and G. But obviously those vowels and consonants have a different phonetic sound in Vietnamese. But yeah, Ba Chang. they've been operating there for over a millennium. So during like Chinese occupation, French occupation, a lot of people have had different occupation of like Southeast Asia, but Vietnamese people are very resilient and nationalistic, and they claim ownership. And it's, in a way, though, it has been a lot of the same people there, right? But just different other people occupying that land. But yeah, specifically when I was there, I was living across the river. It's a smaller river, not the Great Red River Delta. Pardon me, little tongue twister. I was living across the smaller river from Ba Chang, and it was like a 5-minute bike ride away. So like pretty much right there in the village. And so I just bike to work every day. And fortunately, when my parents came with me, it was just like happenstance that we ran into someone while meandering the village who was like, sure, I'll set you up with studio space, whatnot. And like I have a production site of my own, and you can work here and like use my resources, facilities, and like if I don't have anything that can accommodate you, like let me help you.
Wow, that's incredible.
Right. I've come to find though that it wasn't just the grace of that one family though, too. Like a lot of folks in that village, and like I think culturally for Vietnamese people, like there is a very strong sense of community and like a willingness to like see something through. So many times I was met with like an answer of like, I'm sorry, I'm not able to help you, not me personally, but I have a friend who can. Let me call him up, or like, let's go walk to a shop or something right across the street. And so many times people are willing to do that, even if they're not getting any sort of like cut out of the deal or something. Because they just know it's going to come back. It's going to strengthen their community, strengthen their friend's business, which will in part strengthen theirs. So the community there was so strong, which was inspiring. But yeah, so the family that I was working with, they specialized in like whiteware, teapots, and functional ware, cast porcelain. Most people would use cast porcelain in the village, but a handful of people would use like stoneware or like earthenware and things like that. Depends on what's being made. But what's so specialized is that each family in the village has their own specific craft or process within the whole entire ceramics process, right? This may be a bit hard to articulate for folks who are not tied to like ceramic production, but I feel like Western studio ceramics, right? Like something that I'm doing in like my own independent practice as an artist is very like individualized, right? It's like, sure, maybe I buy this clay from someone else, but I have to mix it, and then I have to throw it. I have to be the one to trim it and surface it and glaze it. And then I sign it, it's me, and then I sell it. And that was all my labor. And it makes for a beautiful, but like a $50 to $100 mug, right? If it's really crafted. Yeah, and it's a very like individualistic approach that, I don't know, I think it robs a lot of Westerners' ideas around creative expression to feel so feel like it's like property or like right, like obviously there is like intellectual like preservation of like thought and like creativity and stuff like that, but I think it robs us of the opportunity if we don't have like collaboration, right? I feel like so much creativity exists from like communal collaboration or like just intertwined collaboration and mutual engagement that oftentimes like American or Western makers or artists or craftsfolk don't necessarily engage with, just because it's just them in their studio, right? I digress. That's a very large conversation, but I don't digress. I'm gonna go into it. And I find it craft originally is this thing that exists, that came out of resistance from the post like second industrialization in Europe, to be like, oh, we're gonna have women or domestic people, making objects that are handmade out of resistance, right? And we see industrial production that is so dehumanizing, right? Humans are removed from that process in a lot of ways, but they're still there. And craft was this thing to like kind of bring us together, right? And now it feels like, oh my gosh, even though that's only like 100 years ago, craft in America, people just do it by themselves. Like, yeah, sure, maybe there are like crafting clubs, and that is this like underground resistance or like gathering to keep us centralized and remind us, hey, craft is like a communal effort. But more times than not, it's really easy to mix like our goals with like why we make craft with like that of capitalism, right?
That's what I was going to say. It feels like it's very monetized.
Of course, right? But at the same time, it's inescapable, right? Capitalism being the overarching system, it's like, how do we then like produce craft or produce artistic, beautiful objects without it needing to be of, well, what's my transaction out of this? What is like the capital gain, or how much is this going to cost me, or how much can I make off of this, right? It's unfortunate that's how the system is in place, but it seeps into everything, and everything we think is even resistant to it, right? Craft, we think inherently is resistant to capital, but then at the same time, it's like craftspeople in America, they only know how to make their work by themselves and then sell it for themselves. I really do digress now. Anyways, back in Vietnam, it was like the complete opposite. It was such a whirlwind to really like grapple with too, to be like, oh, this family only makes the molds, and this family only makes the core models for the molds. This family only makes like colorants and glazes. This family only makes like this specific type of big bottle for temples or something. And if you need like XYZ, you go to like a specific person. There's no one centralized person. No one person can do the whole process. And I think that's what makes it flow so well. So not only was I working with this family that was doing like whiteware casting, but they referred me to some other folks who were doing some super large scale like bottle forms. And so I had the immense privilege to work alongside them and the artisans who make those pieces daily, to learn some of the skills they have, yes, but also have them collaborate with me on some works. A lot of my recent practice that I did in Vietnam is like, I recognize I wouldn't be able to do by myself. And that's not something I try to hide or play off. And I feel like it's such, it's like mum's the word, in the art world, when we see these grandiose pieces by like Jeff Koons or Takashi Murakami. And, he doesn't do those things by himself. He barely even touches them. Like Murakami, if we read about him, he comes into the studio at 6 a.m. and he like looks at the collar swatches. He's like, change that, change that, change that. And he leaves to go do some touring, right? And then he makes all of his studio assistants do it. And, in that own way, that's like an exploitative cycle, right? So collaboration and independent fabrication, right? There's a line to be teetered of like, well, when does this become oppressive for some people involved? But I think it's like how you do it, how you present it, right? So with all of my works, I had these two big bottle forms that I presented this last year at Art Prize in Grand Rapids. But I made sure I wanted to have all like the artist names included, not just mine, even though I did like a lot of the design and like the matrix of like the sketching. But I asked all like the artisans, who I knew were engaging. I'm sure there were some who I missed who were just invisible in the background that I didn't know. But I tried to ask all the artisans who helped me, can I get your name? I want to represent you with this work. And when I was asking them that, they all gave me this funny look. They're like, why do you want my name? What? Like they were honored, but it was like, no one ever asks them that question. It's a lot different culturally over there too, because like that is their job, right? They go and they just like paint out these pots, and they will paint them for someone who perhaps like stamps like a brand label or something, but they never have their artisan signature. So that was important for me, where it's like I wanted to give honor and show and credit to those who were involved. And that kind of is a lot of my message and a lot of work that I do, not just like by the piece, like, but perhaps more on like a grand scale of like whose labor is involved in like the production or the manicuring of these like forms. So I often work in like industrial forms or highly like molded and cast forms, right? Back to that, those processes that like remove human touch and engagement within a form. I argue that it's all like extensions of human rudimentary labor, right? Someone had to make the machine that then makes the object. But we're just so abstracted from it that it's hard to visualize, but still understanding that that's human labor and that's oftentimes exploited. So I've been specifically inspired by like historical events and revolutionary events that have taken place in Vietnam during like colonial occupation from the French. But regardless, whether it's that or current things that I'm doing, I feel like a lot of my practice revisits this thought or mode of like, I want to, you know, perhaps reposition suppressed histories or relational histories to the workers or to just history in general, which I also find fascinating of like, you know, things that happened less than 100 years ago can feel so distant, right? Like, you know, 1975 is only 50 years ago.
Yeah.
The fall of Vietnam, and yet like, I don't know, I just see so many similarities now with like the displacement and the segregating of a strip of land, right? And the refugees that come from this bomb-ridden country. And I'm grateful that Vietnamese refugees had that sanctuary here in America and were humanized in that way. But I'm appalled by like, you know, the response we see for other folks who perhaps don't look like Vietnamese people or look like white people, right? And come from another part of the country or another part of the world and are facing extremely similar conditions, but are left with no place to go.
Heartbreaking.
Yeah, that's all I'll say there. But obviously it's like a lot of my work not only alludes to like violence that took place in Vietnam or to Vietnamese people or people within suppressive systems, but it's supposed to like parallel all of that, right? I feel like I want to encourage viewers of my work to hopefully have a more critical mind around like companies and institutions that facilitate our lives.
I feel like that's important.
Right? The commodities we consume, right? I'm not asking anyone to be perfect. I'm not perfect. I'm not asking you to boycott anything, but I'm asking you to just, you know, be aware. I think that's the first step, because it's really easy to be misguided. I feel like everything's trying to capture your attention nowadays. Companies are trying to sway you away from what's actually happening. Government's the same, right? And it's like, I feel like literacy and critical thinking has been subsiding in the last years. And that's something I want to encourage for like all viewers of my work.
I love that.
Yeah. Thanks.
So currently, are you studying anywhere? Are you working on anything new or interesting?
Yeah, well, actually, I'm about to have a solo exhibition here in Chicago later this month. It's going to open up the 23rd of April. I don't know when this video is going to go out, but
It'll be out before that.
oh, okay. But so a lot of that work that will be presented is going to be at Old Friends Gallery up by like Wrigleyville. It's run by some sweet friends of mine. But it's going to be a lot of the work that I produced while I was abroad and had help over in Vietnam, but as well some newer works. I've been making some works here. This is my current studio at K College, where I currently work as a technician and a teaching assistant. But yeah, I don't know. We were talking about this earlier, but it's like, as much as I love making, it's been hard for me lately. You know, being outside of school, being outside of like an institution or some sort of program that really is generous with its funding or access to resources and facilities, right? It makes it hard to do such a facility necessary craft, such as ceramics, like independently. That's not to say I can't express myself in other ways, like drawing and whatnot, but I mean, I'm a ceramic artist, I'm a sculpture artist, so I need this medium to continue pursuing what I'm doing. And I mean, I'm grateful that I don't have to pay for this studio, but it's just like, when it comes to buying materials or applying to calls and paying my rent, doing all those things, like, the amount of funds I can pull from just gets thinner and thinner. So it's like, it's been really tough for me to make work as of late, while I have these 2 other jobs, but I still try. My hope, I'm not trying to say anything and claim anything before it actually happens, but my hope is that in the next year or so, I can either land some sort of long-term residency that will hopefully either have assistant housing or housing in some degree, and grant me with the resource and access to really focus in my practice. And maybe I only need like 1 part-time job or something, or none at all. And right, and that can help me break through in a way to be more sustainable just on the artistic practice. I think that's the goal for a lot of people. And as I was mentioning earlier, there's a lot of ladders, there's a lot of avenues to that, and it's hard to figure out which one's right for you, and that's what I'm trying to do. But if that doesn't work, I think I can also, do what I was doing in Vietnam. That was similar to like my approach and within my proposals for those projects and like grant funding, where I was like, that sort of research is untraditional to like certain like American Western art students, right? I feel like oftentimes you go to undergrad, then maybe you go to grad school and then do some residencies, and perhaps then you're getting into some collector base. But I'm queer. I've never been in the traditional, so I'm used to breaking the mold a little bit, and if that means being like a trailblazer and trying something new and maybe failing but learning something, I'll do that. So if residencies don't seem to work out, like I also see myself hopefully having like a practice in Vietnam, and I'd love to have this sort of reciprocal conversation between perhaps like craft that's functioning here in America and in the West, and then like craft and art that is happening in Asia and in Vietnam. Yeah.
It sounds incredibly interesting.
Yeah.
I feel like it's a message that needs to resonate with more people.
Hopefully. I mean, I will say specifically in ceramics, right? There's this long romantic like history of like Eastern wares, or China, right? That's why we have the moniker of China when we're talking about porcelain wares. But that like romanticization and obsession almost has been long for like very specifically like Eastern wares of Chinese, Korean, or Japanese production, and less so much for Southeast Asian art and Vietnamese art when they've been functioning and operating for the same amount of time. Back to this negotiation of history and narrative, something I'm always intertwined within my work, but it's like it's in all canons everywhere. And just because it happened doesn't mean like we can't change how it's represented or how much we represent it, right? I think that is what history is. It's not the act itself that happened in the past, but it's like how we remember it and who articulates it. I think that's really what is making history. So I just want to be a part of making history.
I love that. Well, thank you, Micah. This has been a great interview.
Thank you so much.
If people want to check out your works, where can they find some of your stuff?
Yeah, you can just go to my website. It's micahsweezy.com. I have links to all my social media, my upcoming shows. Everything you need will be found there. So.
And I will put a link in the bio for everybody.
Sweet.
Thank you.
Thank you.